on a windswept Navy base where respect is earned, not given, a quiet janitor stepped forward when no one else would. A group of young soldiers mocked the new girl on her first day, dust on her boots, fatigue in her eyes, a stranger who didn't seem to belong. But the janitor saw something they didn't. And when he defended her, he set off a chain of events that would shake the entire base. Because the woman he protected wasn't just a newcomer. She was the Admiral sent to save them all. What unfolded after that moment changed careers, hearts, and the fate of Driftwood Base forever. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt, inspiring stories about courage, kindness, and second chances, we'd love to have you with us. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story that warms the heart and lifts the spirit. The morning sun over Driftwood Base had a way of softening everything it touched, except the parade sand. The sand was merciless. It found every boot seam, every wrinkle in a uniform, every hesitance in the step of the newest arrivals. And that morning, as a column of young sailors jogged past the outer field, their laughter echoing too loudly for the hour, the sand clung especially hard to the woman lagging behind. Mara Dawson kept her eyes low, her shoulders squared, and her breaths measured. She looked every bit the part she wanted them to believe, an exhausted new administrative hire assigned to logistics, buried under forms and supply lists. Her plain bun, simple backpack, and unpressed khakis didn't help her case either. She moved quietly, intentionally, almost blending into the golden haze rising from the dust. A shout came from the drill group. "Hey, new girl logistics, sending interns to PT now." Another voice followed sharper, careful she might trip over her own boots again. A round of laughter rolled across the field like an incoming tide. Mara pretended not to hear, pretended she hadn't felt the sting behind her ribs, pretended her legs weren't trembling from the very long night she'd had, longer than anyone around her could imagine. She stepped onto a patch of soft sand. Her foot sank, her balance followed. The world tilted. For a split second, she braced for impact, dust in her palms, laughter behind her humiliation settling over her like a storm cloud. A familiar script, one she'd seen play out countless times with junior sailors on their first days. But before she hit the ground, a steady hand caught her elbow. A firm arm anchored her back upright. "You're all right," a calm voice said, deep, steady, and unexpectedly gentle. Mara blinked, momentarily disoriented. A man knelt beside her, one knee in the sand, looking up at her with warm brown eyes, framed by long, slightly unkempt dark hair. His uniform wasn't officer white or enlisted blue. It was the worn olive of a maintenance worker, a janitor. His name patch read, Moore. For a moment, the laughter behind them faded into nothing. "You stepped on the soft spot," he said lightly, as though rescuing strangers from near falls was as routine as tying his boots. The wind pushes the dunes around in ways the base map never quite predicts. Happens to the best of us. Her heart pounded too loudly, not from the stumble, but from the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "Daniel," he added with a small nod. "Daniel Moore." She gave the name she'd rehearsed. "Mara. First day." "Well, Mara, the trick is to test your footing before shifting your weight." He stood slowly, offering a hand of support, but without forcing it. "This place looks flat, but it's got more traps than a training course." She almost smiled. "I'm starting to notice." Before she could say more, a small voice chimed behind them, bright, soft, and full of the kind of curiosity only a child could carry onto a military base without apology. "Daddy, is she okay?" A little girl in a red dress padded through the sand, barefoot, holding a single white daisy. The flower looked impossibly clean compared to the dusty world around her. She couldn't have been more than 5. Mara's breath caught. The child walked straight to her, unafraid, studying Mara's face with a seriousness that didn't match her size. Then, without warning, she held up the daisy. "For you," the girl said. "'Cause you look like you needed it." Mara's throat tightened. Children always had a way of cutting through the armor adults spent years building. She gently accepted the flower, her fingers trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. The girl beamed. "I'm Kayla. Daddy says flowers help people remember they're not alone." Mara looked at Daniel again. Something in his eyes' quiet resilience maybe matched the softness in Kayla's voice. It struck her deeper than she expected. Behind them, the young sailors had gone silent, watching, confused, whispering. Is that the new logistics lady? Why's the janitor helping her so much? What a weird scene. But Daniel didn't seem to care. He dusted off his pant leg and leaned a little closer to Mara, lowering his voice. "Don't let them bother you," he said. "Some folks around here laugh first and ask questions later. Doesn't mean their opinions matter." Mara exhaled carefully. "I appreciate that." "You heading to logistics?" he asked. She nodded. "Long walk." "Want me to point you?" he offered. "Or at least steer you away from the sand traps?" She shook her head gently. "I'll manage. But thank you truly." Kayla tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we give her another flower? I have more at home." Mara's chest tightened again. "One is more than enough." Daniel gave his daughter a soft pat. "We're letting her get to work now, kiddo." Kayla waved exaggeratedly. "Bye, Miss Flower Lady." Mara couldn't help smiling. "Goodbye, Kayla." She turned toward the admin buildings, the sand crunching under her boots, the daisy trembling between her fingers. She kept her steps, even her posture composed, but inside her chest something had shifted, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long, long time. Warmth, human kindness. She had come here prepared to blend in so thoroughly that no one would remember her face, prepared to listen quietly, observe quietly, correct quietly, and reveal herself only when absolutely necessary. That had been the plan, but plans rarely survived contact with real life, especially when a single dad and his barefoot daughter stepped into the script. As she walked away, she heard Daniel call softly after her, "You'll be fine here, Mara. Don't forget steady steps." She didn't turn around, but she heard it all the same, and she carried the daisy with her into the heart of Driftwood Base, unaware she had just met the 2 people who would change the entire trajectory of her life, and unaware that the man who helped her would one day stand beside her in a storm far greater than sand or laughter. For now, though, she was simply the new girl. And no one, not even Daniel, knew she wore a star on her shoulder. The administrative wing of Driftwood Base was nothing like the polished command centers Hollywood films loved to show. It was real buzzing, cluttered a maze of overlapping duties, where printers hummed constantly, radios crackled without rhythm, and sailors hurried with folders tucked under their arms like misplaced shields. Mara Dawson stepped inside quietly, the daisy from Kayla tucked carefully between the pages of her notebook. The petals peeked out like a small secret reminder of her morning unexpected soft grounding. She moved with deliberate calm, blending into the rhythm of the hallway. To anyone watching, she was another newcomer, trying not to get lost. But behind her composed expression, her eyes scanned everything with the precision of a woman who had spent decades evaluating bases' departments and the hearts of those who ran them. And what she saw troubled her almost immediately. At the communications window, a young sailor slammed down a malfunctioning tablet. "Third time this week," he muttered. "The system's glitching again. We send requests, they disappear. We fix one error, 3 pop up." Across the hall, an ensign and a petty officer argued over scheduling. I told you those trucks weren't signed out. Well, the report says they were so. Who messed up the paperwork? The irritation wasn't malicious. It was the weariness of a team pushed past its limits. Processes weren't just slow, they were untrustworthy. Broken systems wore people down faster than broken equipment. Mara knew the signs all too well. She continued moving, pausing here and there under the guise of waiting in line or checking a wall map. She pieced together the base's stress points with quiet efficiency. The logistics network was delayed by weeks. Personnel reports weren't syncing. The maintenance supply chain was disorganized. And morale sagged like an old flag under heavy rain. No wonder Daniel's eyes had held that quiet tiredness. This place didn't just demand physical work. It demanded resilience that over time could hollow a person out. A group of sailors crossed behind her, whispering with amused suspicion. "Have you seen the new admin girl? She fixed Turner's login this morning in under 5 seconds. No way. It hasn't solved that in a month. Dude, she didn't even use the manual." "Okay, but who just knows that stuff?" Another voice joined in lower. "She's not regular admin. Something's off." Mara kept her gaze steady, pretending to study a stack of inventory forms pinned to a bulletin board. But their murmurs followed her like smoke. Whispers had a way of spreading faster than truth on a base this size. She entered the supply office next a narrow room with filing cabinets lining both walls. A nervous seaman sat hunched over a database terminal that had frozen halfway through a report. The words, "System error, corrupted data pathway," blinked mercilessly across the screen. "Ma'am, the queues, oh." He blinked at Mara, confused. You're new, right? You might want to come back later. This thing's dead." Mara stepped closer calmly. "What were you trying to do? Start a routine audit?" He hesitated. "It's supposed to take 5 minutes. Instead, it crashes every time I try to load more than 50 entries." "Mind if I look?" she asked softly. He shrugged helplessly. "If you want, but I won't get here until tomorrow. Maybe the next day." Mara leaned over the keyboard, typed a chain of diagnostic commands so fluidly the sailor started leaning in, 2 eyes widening. "How did you—" She pressed enter. The frozen screen flickered, then stabilized. "There," she said. The corrupted pathway was looping itself. I rerouted it. The sailor stared at her as if she'd just resurrected a dead radio from a battlefield. "Ma'am." "Who are you?" Mara simply gave him a small, disarming smile. "Just someone who's seen this error before." The whispers thickened behind her. "That's her. Told you she wasn't just admin. No way she knew that by accident." She slipped out of the room before the questions could pile up. Down the main hallway, Daniel Moore stepped out of a custodial closet, carrying a mop and bucket. He almost walked past her before catching the familiar figure in his peripheral vision. "Mara," he called. She stopped. His voice was warm, steady, like the morning all over again. Daniel took a moment to read her expression, something he did with a natural sensitivity most people lacked. "You look like you've been walking through a storm," he said gently. She exhaled slowly. "Just trying to get my bearings. That bad already." His mouth twitched in half amusement, half sympathy. She avoided the most honest answer. "Busy? Chaotic." He nodded knowingly. "Driftwood's got good people. But the systems," he shook his head. "They're older than some of the sailors running them." Mara's eyes softened. Daniel wasn't just venting, he was protecting. Defending the crew without excusing the cracks in the foundation. A man like that didn't belong with a mop. He belonged leading a team, but life wasn't always fair with the roles it handed out. "Long day for you too?" she asked. "Every day's long," he admitted. "But Kayla's excited for you." She asked if you liked the Daisy. Mara felt warmth rise in her chest again. I did. Very much. Daniel paused, his voice a little lower. You carry yourself differently from most new hires. You've got, I don't know, poise. Like someone who's stood in much harsher places. Her breath caught. Not from danger, but from being seen too quickly. I've had my share of long nights, she replied softly. I figured. He nodded, accepting her guardedness with respect rather than curiosity. If you ever need anything, directions help, or just someone to tell you which vending machine doesn't eat your money, I'm around. Mara couldn't help it. She smiled genuinely for the first time that day. Thank you, Daniel. As she walked away, the whispers behind her grew. She fixed the audit terminal. Turner said she caught corrupted code without checking the manual. She's something else. Yes, Mara thought quietly. She was something else. Something they would learn in time. But for now, she remained the woman with dust on her boots and a daisy in her book, a ghost in plain sight watching the cracks of Driftwood Base with the eye of someone who knew exactly how deep they ran. By sunset, rumors had spread through 5 departments, and no one except maybe Daniel Moore had any idea who the quiet new girl really was. Night came quietly over Driftwood Base. Too quietly, Mara Dawson thought as she stepped into the dim personnel tech room. Bases usually hummed after dark, printers chattering radios, clicking officers muttering over late reports. But tonight, an uneasy stillness hung in the air, broken only by the faint rattle of an old fan and the anxious breathing of one young sailor hunched over a mountain of digital forms. Seaman Jamie Turner looked like he'd been swallowed by his own workstation. Red error boxes covered his monitor like a rash, spreading faster than he could click. His shoulders slumped with every new alert. His uniform jacket lay discarded on the chair. Sleeves rolled up, exposing hands that trembled from too much coffee and fear. Mara watched him for a moment before stepping forward. "You're still here," she said softly. Turner jumped. "Ma'am, sorry, I didn't hear anyone come in." He tried to straighten the files scattered around him as if tidiness might hide his panic. "It's after 2100 hours, Mara noted gently. "You're supposed to be off duty." "I know," he whispered, "but if I don't finish repairing these data logs tonight, the chief will lose it tomorrow. And half of this system's corrupted. I can't even find the root problem." He rubbed his hands over his face, and the fear beneath his frustration slipped out. "They said if I mess this up again, I might get written up. I'm already on thin ice after last month's mix-up." So that was the weight pressing on him. Fear of failing. Fear of disappointing leadership. Fear of being dismissed as incompetent. Mara had seen those fears break bright futures before. "Move over," she said, pulling up another chair. "Let's see what you've got." Turner blinked. "Ma'am." "You really don't have to, I know," she replied. "But you shouldn't face this alone." He hesitated, then nodded, sliding slightly to the left. The screen was a mess. Corrupted logs, duplicate entries, broken data threads looping back on themselves like tangled wiring. Mara scanned line after line with a calm, clinical eye. "You didn't make these errors," she said quietly. "This has been accumulating for months," Turner's voice cracked. "I tried to tell them, but no one listens." "I'm listening," Mara said. For the next 20 minutes, she typed, rewired, and reconfigured. She rebuilt the data chains with a fluency no clerk should have, not unless they'd once overseen entire naval systems. Every keystroke was deliberate. Every command came from memory, not a manual. Turner watched with widening eyes. "How are you doing that?" he whispered. Mara didn't look up. "Practice. Where would a logistics clerk get practice like that?" Her fingers slowed. A shadow passed behind her expression there and gone. "I've worked in places where errors couldn't be afforded," she said carefully. Turner swallowed but didn't ask more. Something in her voice told him not to press. 10 minutes later, the final corrupted thread snapped into alignment. The screen blinked, then miraculously stabilized. Turner gasped. "It's clean. The whole chain is clean." "Run the audit again," Mara instructed. He did. This time, the system hummed smoothly, no errors flashing. "I don't know what to say," Turner stammered. "I've been losing sleep over this for weeks." Mara sat back, letting him breathe properly for the first time that night. "You're doing the best you can with a broken system," she told him. "Don't let anyone call that incompetence." Turner looked at her, as if she had just lifted the entire base off his shoulders. "Ma'am, people talk about you, you know," he said quietly. "They say you're not just another admin hire." Mara tensed, not visibly just enough for her pulse to tighten. "They say you've got experience, that you carry yourself like someone who's seen real pressure." Her voice softened. "Everyone carries something." Turner studied her for a moment. "What do you carry?" She didn't answer, not because she couldn't, but because the truth would crumble everything she was trying to observe quietly from within. A faint rustle at the doorway broke the moment. Daniel Moore stood there, mop in hand, bucket beside him. He had paused mid-step, watching the scene unfold. His eyes flicked to Turner, then to Mara, taking in the tension, the exhaustion, the faint glow of relief on the sailor's face. "Everything all right in here?" Daniel asked gently. Turner nodded quickly. "Better than all right. She just saved my skin." Daniel raised an eyebrow toward Mara with a quiet, knowing half-smile. Of course she did. Mara found herself fighting a strange warmth in her chest. Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "Long night. For both of you, it looks like." Turner exhaled, rubbing his eyes. "Feels like the longest of my life." Daniel nodded with the empathy of a man who had seen too many people stretched thin. "You should go home," he told the young sailor. "Get sleep. Problems look smaller after rest." Mara added softly. "He's right." Turner gathered his things. Before leaving, he paused in front of Mara. "Ma'am, thank you. Seriously. I don't know why you're here or how you know what you know, but I'm grateful." She gave him a nod that held more weight than words. When he left, Daniel stepped farther into the room, his boots quiet on the old linoleum. "You fixed another system," he said. "It needed fixing," she replied. "You're not just good," Daniel continued. "You're calm. Too calm for someone new." Mara glanced at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation," he said gently, "and maybe a little concern." She hesitated just long enough for him to catch something flicker across her eyes. "You don't need to explain," Daniel added quickly, raising a hand. "I'm not asking for secrets. I just notice things." Mara studied him, this janitor, with hands worn by work eyes, softened by raising a daughter, alone, a voice steady enough to quiet storms. He noticed more than most officers she'd served with, more than she expected. Finally, she said softly, "Some scars teach you to steady your hands when others shake." Daniel's expression shifted, understanding, quiet empathy. "Something warm," I figured, he murmured. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here." The words brushed something inside her she hadn't felt in years. Mara turned back to the dim room, the cleaned-up system glowing softly on the screen. An invisible line had been crossed tonight, not just in the data, but in the base itself. People had begun to see her, not for who she truly was, but for who she could be. A quiet miracle in a place falling apart. And Driftwood Base had no idea how badly it would need her soon. The Driftwood Base mess hall was loud in the way only military cafeterias could be, metal trays, clattering boots, stomping conversations mixing into a constant, restless hum. The smell of burnt coffee lingered stubbornly in the air, wrapping around the room, like a second uniform no one asked for. Mara Dawson stepped inside quietly, keeping her shoulders small, steps measured. She hoped to slip through unnoticed, but Driftwood had already begun whispering her name, even if they didn't know who she truly was. She joined the coffee line, a slow-moving snake of tired sailors rubbing their eyes. Mara reached for a paper cup, just as two officers, both lieutenants both young enough to be reckless, stepped directly in front of her. "Hey," one of them said, without looking back. "Line's backed up. Move faster." Mara froze, hand half extended. The second lieutenant glanced over his shoulder, smirk forming. "You're that new clerk, right? Logistics or something. They'll send anyone these days." A few heads turned. The mess hall had a habit of noticing tension. Mara lowered her gaze, not out of fear, but calculation. She couldn't afford unnecessary attention, not yet. "I was just reaching for, we know what you were reaching for," the first officer cut in. "Try not to slow the line. Some of us have real jobs." The words were sharp but careless, thrown not to hurt, but to show off. Still, they splintered something inside her, something that had grown tender after Kayla's daisy and Daniel's quiet kindness. She drew a breath. Before she could speak, a familiar voice rose behind her, quiet but firm. "That's enough." The officers turned. Daniel Moore stood there, one hand, still holding a mop handle. Boots slightly dusted from the morning's work sleeves rolled up. His posture wasn't confrontational, and yet, something in his eyes made the air shift. The first lieutenant rolled his eyes. "Moore, stay out of this. We're talking to the new girl." Daniel stepped forward slowly, not aggressive, not challenging, simply present. Solid, like a wall that refused to be ignored. "You can talk," he said calmly, "but you're not going to disrespect her." The second lieutenant scoffed. "Disrespect? We're asking her not to hold up the line." "You cut in front of her," Daniel replied. "Then you mocked her. That's not order. That's arrogance." Mara swallowed hard. It wasn't the confrontation that shook her. It was the effortless certainty in Daniel's voice, the steadiness of a man who didn't know her identity, didn't owe her anything, yet stood for her anyway. The first officer stepped forward. "You're a janitor. Don't forget your place." Daniel didn't flinch. "I know my place," he said quietly. "It's standing on the side of basic respect." Something in the mess hall shifted, subtle but undeniable. Boots stopped moving. Voices died down. Soldiers and sailors glanced over their trays. Driftwood was not used to seeing a janitor challenge officers. The silence that followed had teeth. The lieutenant scoffed, but the sound was hollow now, weak next to Daniel's grounded calm. Whatever the officer muttered. "We don't need this." He jerked his head toward the exit. "Come on." The two officers stepped out of line and left their bravado trailing behind them like deflated sails. Daniel turned to Mara, expression softening instantly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, no, from something far less familiar. Gratitude, protection, being seen, without rank. "I'm fine," she said quietly. Daniel stepped aside, gesturing for her to move forward in the line. "Go ahead." The sailor behind Mara, a beefy man with kind eyes, said under his breath, "Good on you, Moore," another murmured. Not every officer would have done that. The words fanned out behind them small sparks of realization. Mara caught a few of the whispers. "He's always like that. Guy's got a spine of steel. No wonder his kid's such a sweetheart." Kayla, as if summoned by the thought, came bounding into the mess hall, weaving between tables like a tiny comet. She spotted Mara instantly and ran over her red dress, fluttering like a flag in motion. "Miss Mara," she squealed. Before Mara could react, the little girl thrust another flower toward her, this one a tiny blue wildflower petals. soft and trembling. "For you again," Mara blinked, caught off guard. "Another one," Kayla nodded vigorously. "Daddy says people need flowers on days when other people aren't nice." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. She overheard the tail end of that argument. Kayla puffed up proudly. "I know when people are sad." Mara knelt slightly to meet her eye level. "Thank you, sweetheart. This means more than you know." Daniel watched the exchange with a quiet warmth that softened the years etched into his features. Mara saw it, the gentle love of a man who carried the world for someone small. Kayla giggled and ran off toward the dessert counter, already hunting for someone else to brighten. Mara rose slowly. "You didn't have to step in," she said. Daniel shrugged lightly. "Didn't like how they talked to you." "Most people wouldn't have done that," she replied softly. "I'm not most people." His tone wasn't boastful. If anything, it was humble matter-of-fact. A truth spoken simply because it was true. Mara held his gaze a beat too long, then looked away, unsettled by how deeply she wanted to keep looking. She hadn't expected this. Not kindness in the dirt. Not protection in a cafeteria filled with rank and swagger. Daniel Moore didn't wear stars. He didn't need to. Around them, the sailors who witnessed the moment exchanged glances. None mocked her now. None sneered. Something had shifted quietly but unmistakably. Respect. Not because she was an admiral, because she was a person worth defending. As Mara moved to pour her coffee, she felt Daniel step slightly behind her, not hovering, not intimidating, just present. A quiet guard in a world where respect had begun wearing thin. And Driftwood Base, without knowing it, had changed that day. Not because of rank or reports or protocols, but because a janitor with tired hands and a brave heart chose to stand between cruelty and a stranger. A stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. A woman who carried stars beneath her ordinary clothes. A leader who had finally found someone worth standing still for. By late afternoon, Driftwood Base lay under a heavy sky, the color of bruised steel. The wind carried a strange electricity, an unspoken warning that the weather was turning faster than anyone expected. Seagulls circled low, unsettled. Flags snapped harshly on their poles. Mara Dawson walked toward the motor pool with her hands in her pockets, hair tugged loose by the rising breeze. She'd intended only to check inventory forms and observe equipment conditions from afar. But the moment she stepped inside the chain-link fence, she stopped short. The motor pool looked like a battlefield. Trucks sat half disassembled. Toolkits lay open on the ground. Forms were clipped to vehicles, with bright red missing parts tags, half of which contradicted one another. A forklift sputtered angrily like it was on its last breath. And in the center of it, all struggling against flapping tarps, was Daniel Moore. He was helping two mechanics tie down supplies as the wind tried to tear the bungee cords from their hands. His faded uniform clung to his shoulders, hair whipping in the gusts, sleeves rolled up past his elbows. Every movement was tired, but purposeful. Mara approached slowly. Daniel didn't notice her at first, not until the tarp snapped loose and smacked him across the shoulder. He cursed under his breath, wrestling it back into place. One of the younger mechanics tried to help, but nearly got knocked down by the wind. "Hold it, no, not like that," Daniel called. The young man lost grip anyway. Mara stepped forward and grabbed the flapping edge before it struck the mechanic again. She held it firmly, lowering her center of gravity just enough to absorb the pull. Daniel turned and froze for a moment. "Mara," he breathed. "What are you doing out here?" "Helping," she said simply. He blinked, surprised, grateful, maybe a little worried. But he didn't argue. That alone said something. Together, the three of them secured the tarp. When the final hook clicked into place, The wind howled its displeasure and eased just enough to let them catch their breaths. The younger mechanic shook his head. Storm's rolling in hard. Mara glanced upward. It'll hit earlier than forecast. Daniel gave her a look, measuring curious. How do you know? She hesitated. Old instincts tugged at her tongue. Experience, she said finally. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting the answer even if it was thin. The mechanic jogged off to check another vehicle, leaving Mara and Daniel momentarily alone between the trucks and the darkening sky. It's worse than I thought, Mara murmured, scanning the scattered reports clipped to windshields. Half these engines are overdue for inspection. Supply chain, a mess. Some parts aren't even logged correctly. Daniel exhaled. Yeah, we've been running on patches and prayers for months. She turned toward him. How do you manage? He shrugged with a tired smile. One broken thing at a time. Wind tugged harder now, pushing them closer beneath the overhang. Mara studied his face, creases of exhaustion stubble from long hours, but eyes still warm and steadfast. You carry more than you say, she whispered. Daniel laughed quietly. Parenthood. That'll do it. They leaned against the side of a Humvee as the wind rattled the nearby chain link. Mara wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from something deeper. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. You all right? He asked softly. She nodded. Just thinking. About what? About people who keep standing, even when everything around them feels like it's falling apart. His expression gentled. You're one of them. She looked away quickly. Not always. Most people aren't. But you. He studied her with unsettling patience. You steady other people, even when you're not steady yourself. His words hit her with unexpected force. No one had spoken to her like that in years, not without agenda, not without rank between them. She swallowed slowly. The wind screamed suddenly, slamming a loose hood latch against a Jeep. Daniel reacted first, going to secure it. Mara followed, helping him fasten the metal plate, despite the wind trying to tear it back open. When they finished, both were breathing hard from the effort. Thank you, Daniel said, slightly out of breath. You don't have to thank me, she answered. I do. His voice softened. Most people wouldn't step into this chaos. Chaos. That was exactly what she had once been trained to command. But she didn't say that. Not yet. A quiet moment settled between them. Rare, fragile. Then Daniel spoke again. Voice low enough the wind nearly carried it away. You said earlier, you've had long nights. She didn't respond, but her silence was an answer. He continued gently. I know what losing sleep does to a person. My wife, she passed 8 years ago. Mara turned to him, startled by his openness. It was sudden, he said. Kayla was just a baby. I didn't know how to do half the things she needed. Honestly, I still don't some days. He smiled faintly. But we figure it out. Together. Mara's chest tightened, not with pity but resonance. Loss recognized loss. I'm sorry, she said softly. You don't need to be. His gaze steadied. Grief doesn't go away, but it teaches you who you want to be moving forward. She looked at him. Really. Looked at him. The gentle strength, the quiet resilience, the heart that refused to close. Something inside her, long sealed shut, shifted. A mechanic ran over, then breaking the moment. More. We need help securing the generator crates before the wind takes them. Daniel nodded. I'll be right there. He turned to Mara. You should go inside. Storm's going to slam this place hard. Mara glanced at the chaos again. Cables tangled. Trucks, half-covered tools rolling in the wind. And she shook her head. I'll stay. Daniel's eyes softened, pride flickering in his expression. Didn't think you were the type to run. I'm not, she said quietly. He smiled, small but real. Side by side beneath a darkening sky, They moved toward the storm and the work waiting ahead. Neither knew it yet, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that would strike Driftwood Base that night. And Mara Dawson, quiet hidden watching, would be the only one who could stand in its center without breaking. By dusk, the storm had stopped whispering and started shouting. Wind howled across Driftwood Base with a force that shook window panes and twisted the flagpole ropes into cracking whips. Rain began as a mist, then thickened into violent sheets that slapped the pavement like angry hands. The sky flashed in sudden white bursts, lightning tearing through the clouds as if trying to rip them apart. Inside, logistics' fluorescent lights flickered. A hum in the walls stuttered. Mara Dawson stood beside a supply cabinet, her pulse tightening in a way she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, but recognition. Storms didn't unsettle her. What followed storms usually did. A corporal rushed down the corridor, face pale. Systems are, ma'am, the radios are glitching. We're trying the backup link, but the lights snapped off. Half a second later, they flickered back on dimmer this time. Mara's breath steadied not visibly, just inside where trained instinct overrode surprise. The sudden shift in electricity wasn't an accident. The storm was interfering with power lines, maybe the comm tower. This was the kind of chaos she was built for, and she knew it had only just begun. Outside, Daniel Moore locked the last maintenance closet before grabbing Kayla from the childcare annex. The wind pushed hard enough that he had to brace his body just to keep moving. "Daddy, the sky is loud," Kayla whispered, clinging to his neck. "Is the base breaking?" "No, sweetheart," Daniel said softly. "Just a big storm. We're okay." But his jaw clenched, because the base sounded wrong, too frantic, too disorganized. Alarms blipped at inconsistent intervals. Personnel ran past without clear direction. Something was unraveling. He tightened his grip on Kayla's raincoat hood and scanned the courtyard. Where was Mara? He wasn't sure why her absence struck him so sharply. Maybe because she had a steadiness he didn't yet understand. Maybe because he'd seen the way she watched a room like she was preparing for battle. He looked toward the communications building. Chaos rippled through the windows. His gut sank. He hurried. Inside communications control, red lights flashed relentlessly. Screens that were supposed to display flight patterns and radio frequencies instead showed static lines and error codes. A chief yelled into a dead radio handset. "Tower, respond. Tower, do you read, God not?" Now Mara slipped in quietly, her clothes still damp from the motor pool. "What's down?" she asked. The chief startled. "Who are oh? New admin girl." His voice was distracted. "It's the storm. Took out half the primary frequency. We're losing contact with inbound aircraft." Lightning lit the room blue-white. A second sailor shouted from another console. "Sir, we've lost the tactical channel too. Everything is cascading," the chief cursed. "Switch to backup, we tried." "The backup line is corrupted." Mara stepped closer. "Corrupted how?" The sailor blinked, confused why a clerk would ask, but answered anyway. "We're locked out of the fallback routing. The system's reading old coordinates. It's trying to load a chart from 8 months ago." Mara felt it like a cold drop inside her chest. 8 months ago, the airspace map was different. A plane following that route. Would her thoughts snapped in place? "How many aircraft are inbound?" she asked sharply. The chief snapped his attention to her, surprised by her tone. "1. A C-40 transport, coming in heavy with equipment from the strike group. ETA, 15 minutes. And tower." She pressed. No response. Visual negative. Lightning cracked again, louder this time. Mara exhaled, steadying herself. She had been Rear Admiral long enough to know exactly what this spelled: a blind landing in a storm, with dead comms. A pilot relying on incomplete data. A base unable to guide them to runway alignment. Lives in danger. A crisis unfolding in real time. She should have revealed herself, stepped into authority, taken command openly, but she couldn't not yet. Not without the incoming chain of command announcement. Instead, she would have to lead in the one way she still could, quietly, decisively, without waiting for permission. She turned to the sailor. "Route access denied. Override it manually," she ordered. "Bypass the corrupted sector and reroute through the secondary console." The chief frowned. "That won't work. The secondary console hasn't been recalibrated since last year Mara finished." "Yes, I know. Do it anyway." The chief stared, unable to hide his shock. "How the hell do you know that?" But before he could demand more answers, the wall radio sputtered. Static. Panic. Then a broken voice. "Driftwood Tower. This is 80 requesting guidance." The pilot was reaching through a dying frequency. The room froze. Mara didn't. "Answer him," she snapped. "We can't. The transmitter's out." "Then use the emergency wideband," she insisted. The chief swallowed, rattled by her confidence. "We don't usually use that for inbound aircraft." "Then tonight you will." The sailor scrambled, and for a moment, just long enough, Mara forgot she wasn't in uniform. Forgot she wasn't supposed to lead. Forgot she wasn't supposed to know every intimate weakness of Driftwood Base. Her voice cut through the storm like a knife of steel. "Everyone listen. We have one chance to get that plane down. I want eyes on the weather grid. Manual checks on the comm tower. Send 2 men to every generator. Move." And they did. Because something in her tone wasn't a request. Something ancient and commanding pressed behind each syllable. Something they recognized before they understood. Meanwhile, Daniel reached the communications building entrance. Kayla clung to him as he shielded her from the stinging rain. Inside, he saw chaos, officers running, alarms blaring, and then he saw her. Mara standing in the center of the storm, inside these walls, with the same quiet fire she had shown outside. Lightning lit her face through the windows, catching the steel in her expression. Daniel froze. This wasn't the woman who stumbled in the sand. This wasn't the new clerk everyone whispered about. This was someone forged by storms. Kayla tugged his collar. "Daddy, she looks like she's not scared at all." No, he thought. She wasn't scared. She was leading. He pressed Kayla close, watching something he couldn't yet name bloom inside him. Respect. Awe, and a dawning suspicion who was Mara Dawson. As the storm roared outside, the red lights kept flashing. The pilot's voice crackled again, more desperate this time. "Losing altitude request, Driftwood, anyone come in?" Mara stepped forward slowly. Her hand hovered over the emergency transmitter. Her voice dropped calm as a winter sea. "I've got you," she whispered, not to the room but to the pilot who couldn't hear her yet. Then she lifted the mic, and Driftwood Base, whether ready or not, was seconds away from hearing the real Mara Dawson speak for the first time. For a heartbeat, the entire communications room seemed to hold its breath. Mara Dawson stood before the emergency transmitter, her fingers hovering just above the worn metal switch. Behind her, sailors waited in frozen anticipation, their faces lit by the pulsing red of warning lights. Rain hammered the roof in relentless waves. Thunder rolled so hard it vibrated the floor beneath their boots. One flick of her hand would change everything. She pressed the switch. A low hum filled the room as the emergency wideband activated an old system rarely used, stubborn and unpredictable. Static crackled, then cleared just enough for a signal to push through. Mara lifted the mic. Her voice came out calm, unnaturally calm for a storm like this. "C-40 inbound. This is Driftwood Base emergency channel. I read you." The room fell utterly silent. Even the storm hesitated, as if reluctant to drown out the sound of someone who had just taken command without needing permission. There was a crackle, then a strained voice answered. "Driftwood. Thank God this is Falcon 2-7 visibility, near zero, systems compromised, requesting immediate guidance." Mara's eyes sharpened. Copy, Falcon 2-7. Maintain current altitude. What's your fuel? We're more static, strained, we're at minimum safe levels. She took a slow breath, steadying her pulse. Understood. Falcon 2-7. I need you to trust me. A beat. Then Roger. Who am I speaking with? Mara glanced at the sailors around her. Their eyes were wide confused, trying to place the authority in her tone. But Daniel, standing at the doorway with Kayla tucked against his chest, knew this voice didn't belong to a clerk. She pressed the transmit button again. My name doesn't matter, she said simply. Right now, only your landing does. She turned to the chief. Patch me into the tower manual override. The chief blinked. Ma'am, that's only senior officers. Now, she said. He obeyed too quickly, too instinctively for his own understanding. Sailor. She continued. I need the last known wind vector before we lost the tower. Pull it from the last telemetry sweep. The sailor scrambled. Yes, ma'am. And get someone up the comm tower, she added. In this storm, they'll need harnesses and manual gear. The room erupted in movement around her, people no longer questioning why they listened. Daniel watched from the entrance. Rainwater dripping from his sleeves, heart thundering harder than the storm. Kayla clutched his shirt, but kept her eyes fixed on Mara. Daddy, she's helping the airplane. Daniel swallowed. Yeah, sweetheart. She is. He'd seen courage in many forms, in the eyes of pilots, in the hands of medics, in the voices of officers under pressure. But what he saw in Mara Dawson now was something else, something deeper. A calm forged in fire, a steadiness born from surviving storms far worse than this one. She wasn't filling in. She wasn't lucky. She wasn't guessing. She knew this world, intimately. Falcon 2-7 Mara said into the mic. We've pulled your approach vector. You're drifting north due to wind shear. I need you to correct 7 degrees south-southeast. Do you copy? The pilot responded immediately. Copy. Correcting. She turned to the weather tech. Give me a manual read on runway visibility. The tech swallowed. Ma'am, with the tower down. The human read, Mara said. Send someone with flare markers and a vest. The chief hesitated. In this wind, they'll be fine, Mara said, her tone final. And they'll save a plane full of crew. The chief didn't argue again. The storm roared louder, like it wanted to drown the base. Rain smeared across the windows in frantic strokes. Lightning illuminated the sky with bone-white flashes. Mara didn't blink. Falcon 2-7, she said, what's your current airspeed? Dropping the pilot strained. Turbulence on all sides. Level out at 900 feet. Keep your wings steady. I'm aligning your runway. Driftwood, the pilot said. Voice frayed, are you sure you know what you're doing? Mara's eyes softened just a flicker. She understood that fear. She had once been trained to guide aircraft blindfolded through simulations worse than this. I've got you, she said again. Stay with me. Behind her, sailors paused, not because of her words, but because of her voice. It carried the kind of conviction that could steady shaking hands, the kind of certainty that came only from experience, or rank. A rank she wasn't allowed to reveal yet. Minutes passed like hours. Sweat gathered at a few brows. Fingers trembled over controls. But Mara, she remained carved from something unshakable. Wind gust increasing, a sailor shouted over the noise. Adjust runway angle 2 degrees east, Mara ordered. Compensate. Bring up the emergency runway lights. They're failing. Then use vehicles, she said without hesitation. Line them up. Headlights at full beam. It was a crazy solution. No manual recommended it. But it would work. Sailors sprinted outside into the rain. Daniel watched them scramble, then looked back at her. This woman who moved storms the way others moved chess pieces. Mara, He whispered more to himself than to her. "Who are you?" Kayla pressed her cheek to his collarbone. "She's brave," the little girl murmured. He tightened his hold on her. Yeah, she is. Finally, Falcon. 2-7. Mara said, voice low, unwavering. "You are aligned. Begin descent. 10 degrees nose down. You'll see the lights any moment. Copy." The pilot breathed. "Driftwood, if this works, drinks are on me." It was forced. Humor fear dressed as a joke. Mara recognized it instantly. "You'll land," she replied softly. "That's all that matters." Everyone leaned in. The radio crackled. "Altitude 600, 400, 200 visual on runway." A gasp erupted from several sailors. Mara closed her eyes for one brief second. Relief washed through her, but she didn't let it weaken her posture. "Ease your descent," she said. "Keep left. Now. Right. Steady." A heart-stopping pause. Then the pilot's voice exploded through the speakers. "Touchdown. We're down Driftwood." "We made it." Cheers erupted through the room. Laughter. Pure adrenaline. Some sailors slumped into chairs, overwhelmed. The chief wiped his face. "I can't believe it. We actually." But Daniel didn't cheer. He stayed at the doorway staring at Mara as if seeing her for the first time. She lowered the mic, slowly. Her shoulders relaxed in the smallest, quietest exhale. And in that moment, just a moment, the mask slipped. The storm outside lit her face again, illuminating a truth she could no longer hide completely. She wasn't a clerk. She wasn't lost. She wasn't new. She was a leader, a commander, a woman who had just saved an entire crew with nothing more than calm certainties and decades of buried knowledge. And Daniel Moore, he knew now. He didn't know her title. He didn't know her past. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Mara Dawson was not who she claimed to be. Not even close. Dawn came slowly to Driftwood Base, hesitant, bruised like the sky was still recovering from the storm. The clouds thinned just enough for the first pale light to slip through, casting a muted glow over puddles scattered across the tarmac. The air smelled of wet asphalt salt and something else, relief, confusion, and curiosity so thick it spread faster than steam rising off the mess hall coffee. Rumors didn't just travel at Driftwood, they sprinted. By 0600, every corridor office and bunk room buzzed with the same hushed retellings. The new logistics girl saved the C-40. She routed the entire landing manually. No, she recalibrated the tower herself. I heard she predicted the storm shift before the weather team did. Who is she? Every version grew a little wilder, but one truth held steady. Mara Dawson had done the impossible. In the mess hall, Daniel Moore sat with Kayla at a corner table, both with breakfast trays in front of them. Kayla's pancakes were shaped into a lopsided butterfly, her idea Daniel's attempt. She poked them with her fork, humming happily. "Daddy," she said. With the confidence of a prophet, Miss Mara saved an airplane. Daniel's heart tightened, not from worry, but from the weight of everything he'd witnessed the night before. "I know," he said quietly. "You saw her?" Kayla asked. He nodded. Was she scared? He shook his head. Not even for a second. Kayla kicked her heels under the bench. Then she's a hero. Daniel looked at his daughter, this small, bright soul who always saw things simply, beautifully, purely. "Yes," he murmured. "She is." But heroes usually didn't hide. And whatever Mara was hiding, it wasn't small. Across the base, Mara stepped into the morning air, exhaustion tugging at her spine. Her hair, still damp from the storm, brushed her collar. She walked with measured steadiness toward the admin wing, though every muscle begged for rest. She had barely slept 2 hours at most. But fatigue wasn't what she carried most heavily. It was the awareness that she had revealed too much. Not her rank, not her name, but her instinct, Her training, her command presence, years of blending in, slipping through spaces unnoticed, observing quietly, undone in one stormy hour. She could almost feel the whispers chasing her through the corridors. At the entrance, a pair of sailors stepped aside to let her pass too quickly, too respectfully for someone they believed was a clerk. One of them whispered under his breath, not quietly enough, "That's her." Mara's jaw tightened. She kept walking. Inside, Turner, the sailor whose corrupted logs she had fixed, caught sight of her and hurried over, cheeks flushed from excitement. "Ma'am Mara, everyone's talking about last night." Mara forced a polite smile. It was a team effort. Turner shook his head emphatically. "No, it wasn't. You saved that plane. The chief says you ran the room better than half the officers on base." Mara gently cut him off. "Turner storms bring out skills in everyone. You did your part." He opened his mouth to argue, but a petty officer called his name from across the hall. Turner hesitated, then said softly, "Thank you again. For everything." Mara nodded once. As he left, she caught two more sailors watching her from near the supply office, whispering behind their hands. She knew the fallback routing without checking the manual. I swear, she sounded like a commander. Should we report it? Or is she already someone important? Mara slipped into an empty records room, closing the door behind her. She exhaled, long, steady, exhausted. She hadn't come here to attract attention. The entire purpose of arriving early incognito was to understand the base before stepping into command formally. But driftwood had forced her hand. The radios, the storm, the failing systems. If she hadn't intervened, people would be dead. She would never regret her choices, only the consequences. She leaned against the counter and closed her eyes. Then a soft knock sounded on the door. Mara straightened instantly. Daniel Moore stepped inside, quietly closing the door partway behind him. He didn't carry a mop or bucket. He didn't look like a janitor right now. He looked like a man who had questions. His expression was not accusing, not suspicious, just searching. "You okay?" he asked gently. Mara hesitated. "I'm fine. You look tired. I'm used to long nights." He exhaled slowly, running a hand through damp hair. "Mara, what you did last night, anyone would have stepped in," she interrupted. "No," his voice was firmer now. "Most people couldn't have stepped in. I've been here 9 years. I've seen crises. I've seen storms hit hard. But I've never seen anyone take control like that." Her heartbeat stumbled. Daniel continued, softer now. "You knew things you shouldn't know. You gave orders people obeyed without question. You saved an entire crew." She held his gaze steady, even as her insides tightened. "Daniel," she said quietly. "I did what needed to be done." He studied her eyes, gentle but unwavering. "Mara, who are you really?" The silence that followed cracked open the space between them. Rain tapped faintly against the window, as if echoing her heartbeat. Finally, she spoke, not lying, but not revealing the truth. "Someone who's trying to help." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I believe you. But help like that doesn't come from nowhere." His words weren't an accusation. They were an invitation. An invitation to trust. Mara swallowed. She couldn't take it. Not yet. She stepped back, putting a respectful distance between them. "I appreciate your concern, but some things aren't for today." He nodded slowly. He didn't push, didn't demand. But he did say one thing before turning to leave. "You can talk to me when you're ready, about whatever it is, whatever you're carrying." Mara felt her throat tighten again, unexpected, unwelcome. Then Kayla suddenly appeared behind him, holding a tiny bouquet of mismatched flowers. "Miss Mara," she squealed. Mara knelt instinctively, the tension melting just enough for Kayla to throw her arms around her neck. "I made you a flower bunch, Because Daddy said you did something brave." Mara held the little bouquet, gently overwhelmed by the purity of the gesture. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. Daniel watched her, something unreadable in his eyes. Something like admiration. Something like worry. Something like an unspoken promise that he wasn't going anywhere. As they left, Mara remained kneeling on the cold floor, Kayla's flowers trembling in her hands. Outside the door, the whispers grew louder. Tomorrow, everything would change. Someone from Washington was arriving. A new Rear Admiral was coming. And no one, not even Daniel, knew that the woman they expected was already here. Standing quietly in the aftermath of a storm, she alone had calmed. Morning broke bright and sharp over Driftwood Base, as if the sky itself wanted to wash away every trace of the violent storm the night before. The air was crisp, the sunlight cleaned the puddles on the asphalt, glowing like scattered mirrors. It was the kind of morning that made uniforms look sharper, boots look blacker, and nerves feel tighter. Because today was no ordinary day. Today, Driftwood Base would meet its new Rear Admiral. The announcement had spread before sunrise, whipping through every hallway and bunk room, Washington sending the new flag officer. Full ceremony. Mandatory formation. About time. Maybe they'll finally straighten things out around here. Wonder if they know we almost lost that transport last night, and how it got saved. Whispers collided with speculation. Nobody agreed on the details. But one phrase traveled untouched, shared quietly like a myth. Ask the new girl. She knows something. On the far side of the base, Daniel Moore buttoned Kayla's small jacket, smoothing the collar as she twisted and giggled. "Daddy, why do we have to go stand outside?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "It's an important day," Daniel said, gently tying her hair back with the red ribbon she loved. "Everyone needs to be there to welcome the new Admiral." Kayla swung her feet. "Will Miss Mara be there?" Daniel paused. "Yes," he said softly. "She will." Kayla beamed. "Then I want to stand close to her." Daniel swallowed a complicated breath. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mara's silhouette illuminated by lightning barking orders, like someone born from storms. He saw her steady hands, her calm voice, her authority. "Mara," he whispered to himself. "Who are you, really?" But there was no answer. Not yet. At 0900, the entirety of Driftwood Base gathered on the parade ground. Rows of sailors stood in crisp formation boots, aligned hands behind their backs. Officers lined the front row. Civilians and support staff janitors, included, stood respectfully along the edges. Daniel stood with Kayla just behind the enlisted rows. She clung to his hand, eyes wide with wonder. But Mara Dawson, she stood at the farthest end of the formation in a plain khaki shirt with her ID badge clipped modestly at her collar. Her heart beat, slow, steady trained, but her palms were damp. This was the moment she dreaded and prepared for. The moment her two worlds, hidden and revealed, would collide. She scanned the field. Sailors she had worked alongside for days now whispered about her. Officers looked her way with confusion, still lingering from last night's heroics. Her gaze found Daniel. He was watching her quietly, as if trying to memorize every detail of her expression. Kayla spotted her and waved enthusiastically. Mara's chest tightened. Then a horn sounded from the right flank of the parade ground. Conversation died instantly. Boots clicked to attention. Even the gulls seemed to fall silent. Rear Admiral arriving. A murmur of reverence rippled through the formation. Everyone turned toward the reviewing platform, and Mara Dawson stepped forward. The crowd blinked, then froze, then stared, because the woman walking toward the platform wasn't wearing khaki anymore. She wore the immaculate white dress uniform of the United States Navy, gold-trimmed shoulder boards, medals aligned with flawless precision, and on each shoulder, a shining silver star. Rear Admiral. Gasps scattered across the parade ground like sparks. Voices trembled into the morning air. Is that the new girl? No, that's, oh my God. She's the Admiral. Daniel felt his breath leave him as if struck by a wave. Kayla tugged his sleeve urgently. Daddy, look. It's Miss Mara. She's the lady with the stars. Daniel couldn't speak, not yet. Not as he watched Mara walk with the quiet authority of someone who had earned every step. Every mistake he'd seen others make the mockery, the dismissal, the disrespect rushed back through him with a hot sting. Shame, awe, something fiercely protective. But more than anything, pride. Kayla clapped with pure joy. Daddy, Miss Mara is important, Daniel whispered hoarsely. Yeah, baby, very important. On the platform, the base executive officer fumbled the introduction, still stunned. Ladies and gentlemen, personnel of Driftwood Base, it is my honor to formally welcome our new commanding officer, Rear Admiral Mara Dawson. Mara stepped to the podium. Silence wrapped around her like a cloak. She scanned the faces before her young sailors, seasoned petty officers, curious civilians. The people she'd walked among quietly. The people who had laughed, questioned, dismissed, or defended her. Her gaze lingered on Daniel and Kayla. He met her eyes, and in that instant, she knew he understood everything without needing a single word. She withdrew a small, steady breath. Good morning, she began. Her voice carried across the entire parade ground, calm, resonant, unmistakably authoritative. I stand before you, not as the stranger you saw this week, but as the officer charged with leading this base forward. A shift rippled through the formation. Embarrassment, respect, realization. For the past several days, Mara continued. I walked among you without rank, without title, without uniform. A sailor swallowed hard. I saw dedication. I saw exhaustion. I saw systems strained to breaking point. And I saw kindness. Daniel's breath caught as her eyes brushed his again. I saw what this base truly is, not in ceremony, but in the quiet moments, in hard nights, in a storm that asked more of you than you were prepared to give. She paused, and I saw people rise. Some sailors blinked rapidly, emotion tightening their throats. Even hardened NCOs shifted their stance. And last night, Mara said softly, "You saw me rise." A murmur ran through the ranks. Mara lifted her chin. I did what any leader should do when lives hang in the balance. Her voice steadied. But leadership is not about stars on a uniform. It's about seeing the people standing beside you. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Daniel, and choosing to stand with them, a deep, reverent silence followed. Finally, she stepped back from the podium. Driftwood Base, she said with quiet conviction, we begin again today. The crowd erupted into applause, loud, unprepared, emotional. Some sailors wiped their eyes. Officers exchanged stunned but respectful nods. Mara stepped down from the platform. As she crossed the parade ground, people parted instinctively out of respect, awe, and something else, gratitude. Daniel approached slowly, Kayla skipping at his side. When Mara reached them, Kayla lit up. Miss Mara, you're a real admiral. Mara knelt, her face softening as she tucked a strand of hair behind Kayla's ear. Yes, she whispered, but I'm still just Mara to you. Kayla hugged her fiercely. Daniel stood a foot away, quiet, steady, overwhelmed. Finally, he found his voice. You could have told me, he said softly. Mara rose to face him. I wasn't ready, she admitted, and the base needed to be seen, as it truly is. Daniel nodded. No anger, no hurt, just understanding deep and sincere. And now he asked. Mara inhaled. Now the real work begins. The storm had passed, but a new dawn, theirs, Driftwood's, had only just begun. The morning ceremony dissolved into a hum of movement. Boots, shuffling voices low with awe, radios clicking back to life with renewed urgency. But something else filled the air across Driftwood Base, something far more profound than routine A shift. A reckoning, a quiet understanding that the woman they once mocked, overlooked, or dismissed now commanded every inch of this place. And no one could forget how she had carried them through a storm. Rear Admiral Mara Dawson walked the length of the operations building slowly, purposefully, each step echoing with the weight of new responsibility. She had worn the uniform for decades, but today it felt heavier. Not because of the silver stars on her shoulders, but because Driftwood Base was no longer a file on her desk in Washington. It was hers, her command, her people. And they needed more than another officer issuing orders from behind glass walls. They needed healing, structure, honor restored, a reminder of why they had sworn their oaths. She stepped into the command conference room. Officers snapped to attention instinctively. Some a beat too late, still shaken by the revelation of her identity. At ease, Mara said. The room exhaled, but tension clung like humidity after a storm. She remained standing. You are skilled, she began, and dedicated. You have served this base with loyalty despite broken systems and unclear leadership. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances, but Driftwood has been running on patches, on resentment, on fatigue, and last night exposed those fractures. A lieutenant opened his mouth as if to defend the base, but Mara raised one hand gently. This is not blame, she said. This is truth, and truth is the first step to rebuilding. Silence tightened again, this time with respect. Mara continued, voice steady, but carrying a depth that commanded the room. I will not tolerate a culture where people are ignored, mocked, or left unsupported. Not on my base. The two lieutenants who had mocked her in the mess hall stiffened visibly. They didn't dare breathe. I walked among you without rank, she added. Some of you showed kindness. Others showed arrogance. Some stepped forward. Others looked away. Her eyes moved slowly across each face. Today we start over. Together. A major swallowed hard. Another officer nodded, cheeks reddening. Mara clasped her hands behind her back. I will be reviewing personnel assignments. Those who have gone overlooked will be seen. Those who have been carrying more than their share will be supported. And those who treat their peers with disrespect. Her gaze sharpened a degree. We'll learn quickly what leadership truly means. Not a threat. A promise. She let the weight of it settle before shifting tone, warm but firm. We have one mission: restore Driftwood Base, and we will do it with discipline, integrity, and humanity. Then softer, and we will do it together. The room rose to its feet, not ordered, not choreographed. It simply happened, out of respect. Mara nodded once, dismissed. As officers filed out, several lingered just long enough to murmur apologies or gratitude. None of it surprised her. All of it mattered. Outside the admin wing, Daniel Moore stood by the courtyard fountain, Kayla perched on the ledge, swinging her legs. He was waiting, not impatiently, but with that quiet endurance he carried like breath. When Mara finally approached, Kayla leapt up eagerly. Miss Mara. Miss Mara. You looked like a movie hero on the stage. Mara laughed softly, bending to straighten the bow in Kayla's hair. Is that so? Kayla nodded vigorously. Yes, Daddy said you were really brave and super calm, and you talked to the big airplane like it was your friend. Mara's eyes warmed. Your daddy is very kind. Daniel cleared his throat, a little embarrassed. She talks a lot. She speaks truth, Mara said gently. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady, searching, respectful in a deeper way than rank could ever command. "You did good in there," he said quietly. "In the ceremony. No. In the storm." His voice lowered. "People don't get saved by systems. They get saved by leaders, and by people who still care." Mara held his gaze, feeling something shift deep inside her, something she didn't have a name for, but recognized the shape of trust. Unsettling and grounding at the same time. "I care," she said simply. "I always have." Kayla tugged Mara's sleeve. "Daddy says sometimes people forget they're important unless someone reminds them." Mara swallowed. "Your daddy sounds very wise." "He is," Daniel laughed softly. "Don't go raising the bar too high, Kayla." But there was warmth in his embarrassment, gentle, genuine, the kind of warmth that invited people closer without meaning to. Mara straightened. "Walk with me," she asked quietly. Daniel blinked. "A janitor walking with an Admiral A man who helped me through a storm," she corrected. "Titles don't matter right now." His eyes softened. "All right." Kayla held both their hands as they walked across the courtyard. For a brief moment, the world felt simple. Over the next hours, Driftwood Base began to change. Mara met with department heads, listening, not commanding, until she understood exactly where the fractures ran deepest. She praised those who had been overlooked. She challenged those who hid behind rank instead of responsibility. She reinstated lost training programs, streamlined maintenance chains, and ordered immediate audits on failing systems. Word spread fast. The Admiral's different. She actually cares. She knows more than our last 3 COs combined. She fixed Turner's logs before she even revealed her rank. She stood in the storm with us. Respect blossomed not out of fear, but recognition. Mara Dawson wasn't here to rule. She was here to rebuild. Late that afternoon, Daniel stepped into the west hallway with a fresh mop and cleaning cart. But he wasn't just cleaning. He was thinking. Every corridor whispered about the new Admiral. Every door he opened held echoes of conversations he wasn't meant to hear, but couldn't ignore. And every whisper confirmed what he had known since the storm. Mara wasn't someone a man like him usually had the right to stand beside. He tried to tell himself he was fine with that. Then he heard her footsteps. She approached, slowly pausing beside him as sunlight slanted through the windows, brushing gold against her white uniform. "You look deep in thought," she said. He shrugged, just watching the base breathe again. She smiled softly. "You helped more than you know." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't do much. You showed me kindness when no one else did." His breath caught. "You reminded me who I want to be as a leader," she said quietly. He looked away, suddenly overwhelmed. "You remind everyone," she added, "that compassion is strength." Daniel exhaled a long, steady breath that felt like relief and gratitude, and something more. "Thank you," he whispered. And Mara realized something then. This base wasn't the only thing healing. She was too. Because sometimes leadership wasn't found behind a podium or in a storm. Sometimes it was found in the quiet courage of a single father who refused to look away from a stranger in the dust. Driftwood Base had learned respect today. And Mara Dawson, she had learned something far rarer: belonging. 6 months later, Driftwood Base didn't look like the same place Mara Dawson had first walked into. Where once the motor pool was a scrapyard of broken systems and frayed tempers, now engines purred in rhythmic harmony. The supply chain ran like a clean artery, steady, reliable, unclogged. Sailors walked with straighter backs, laughter returned to the hallways, and people weren't afraid to ask for help anymore. Morale charts, once dipping dangerously low, rose steadily like a healed tide. They credited the new Admiral, but those closest to the truth knew this renaissance had begun long before her first formal address. It had begun the moment a tired single father reached out a steady hand to catch a stranger in the sand. The moment a small girl in a red dress offered a daisy to a woman who desperately needed one. Kindness had rebuilt Driftwood as much as leadership had. And today, Mara Dawson felt the weight of that truth more deeply than ever. The day was bright sun shimmering across the ocean like molten silver. A gentle breeze rustled through the branches of the old coastal oak near the shoreline. Its trunk was wide roots, twisting into the earth with the patience of a century. Daniel Moore stood beneath that tree finishing his shift early. He had left his cart and mop in the maintenance hallway, washed the dust from his hands, and walked to the only place on base where silence felt like comfort rather than emptiness. Kayla played near the rocks a few yards away, her laughter carried gently by the wind as she skipped between tide pools, searching for treasures the sea left behind. Daniel looked older somehow, but in a good way, like someone who had laid down years of invisible weight. His uniform, still the same olive green workwear, seemed to fit him better now, not because it had changed, but because the man wearing it had. He turned toward the sound of footsteps. Mara approached slowly, hands behind her back, her white uniform softened by the golden afternoon light. Her posture was still immaculate, still precise, but there was a gentleness in her stride that only the rarest of leaders ever learned to carry. When she reached him, Daniel offered a small smile. "You're early," he said. "So are you." "I traded shifts," he admitted. "Wanted to catch the sunlight before it faded." "Good instinct," she replied softly. It's been a long week. She didn't need to say why. Washington had visited. Inspections, audits, strategic evaluations. Driftwood Base was finally receiving the attention it had needed for years, but the process was exhausting, heavy with politics Mara never cared for. Daniel nodded. "You've held this place together. Even Washington can see that. Some days it feels like I'm just holding on by my fingertips." "You're doing more than holding on," he said gently. "You're rebuilding people." She looked at him, then really looked, and something warm stirred between them, familiar, yet unspoken. Mara stepped beside him beneath the oak. From there, they could see the whole coastline, the waves tumbling in slow arcs, sunlight dappling the surface, Kayla hopping from rock to rock with the fearlessness of a child who knew she was loved. "I never asked," Daniel said quietly, "why you chose Driftwood." Mara hesitated. She had been asked that question 100 times in Washington. The answers she gave were always polished reorganization, strategic reassessment, leadership gaps. But Daniel Moore wasn't Washington. He didn't want the official answer. He wanted the truth. So she gave it to him. "I chose Driftwood because it was broken," she said. "And because I was too." Daniel turned to her, surprised, but listening with his whole being. "My father served," she continued. "He taught me that leadership isn't about medals or speeches. It's about seeing people, truly seeing them." Her voice trembled not with weakness, but with memory. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot that." Daniel's expression softened painfully. "I hid in paperwork and war rooms," she said. "I forgot what it meant to stand among the people I was responsible for." She glanced out at the sea. "So I came here, quietly, to see if I could still understand them, understand myself." Daniel exhaled a slow breath. "And did you?" Mara looked at him. "You reminded me," she whispered. The wind tugged at her hair. Sunlight flickered in her eyes. Daniel swallowed, caught between admiration and something deeper, something neither of them wanted to rush. "Mara," he said softly, "you don't owe Driftwood anything anymore. You've given everything you have." "I owe it my best," she replied, "but I don't owe it my loneliness." He blinked, startled by the honesty. She stepped closer. "You don't either." For a moment, neither moved. The bass hummed behind them, but out here under the oak, the world was still. Then Kayla's laughter broke the quiet. "Daddy, Miss Mara." She ran toward them at full speed, holding something tightly in her hands. When she reached Mara, she opened her palm proudly. A daisy, not wilted, fresh, bright white, pure. "I picked this for you," Kayla announced, "because Daddy says you helped fix the whole base, but flowers help fix people." Mara knelt, slowly overwhelmed by the full circle of the moment. 6 months ago, Kayla had given her a daisy to soften her loneliness. Today she offered another, but this time Mara wasn't alone. She accepted the flower, her fingers trembling with a tenderness she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. Kayla threw her arms around her neck. Mara hugged her back tightly, fully, like someone holding not just a child, but a promise. Daniel watched, his eyes warming with something both hopeful and aching. When Mara rose, she kept the daisy pressed gently against her heart. "Some things," she said quietly, "never wilt." Daniel nodded. "Kindness. And the people who give it," Mara added, meeting his gaze. A silent understanding passed between them, gentle, patient, unforced. Whatever came next would not be rushed, not forced, not defined by rank or fear. But it would come. Because storms reveal truths, and daisies remind us where to stand when the world is dark. Mara looked out at Driftwood Base, her people, her strange, unexpected path to healing. Then she looked back at Daniel and Kayla, her reminders of grace and second chances. And she smiled, quiet, steady, enduring, the kind of smile that promised a future built not on storms, but on flowers that never wilt. Before we close today's story, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what part of this story touched your heart the most? Your thoughts and experiences mean so much to us, and we truly enjoy reading every comment you share. If this story brought you a moment of comfort, hope, or inspiration, feel free to like the video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue creating heartfelt stories for you and this wonderful community. Thank you sincerely for spending your time with us today. Your presence here is appreciated more than you know. Until the next story, may kindness follow you wherever you go.